Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, I'm Jimmy from Search Laboratory and welcome to today's webinar about the tools and techniques to join online and offline marketing sources. So if you're not familiar with Search Laboratory, we're a global digital marketing agency. We're based in Brooklyn in New York, and we also have an office in Leeds in England. We offer integrated marketing across channels such as SEO, PPC, programmatic, and we also do that in over 17 different languages across globally. So just in terms of housekeeping, this webinar should last around 30 minutes. And if there's any questions, please ask them in the chat box on the right-hand side. And then we'll schedule some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So this is what we're going to run through today. So I'm going to talk about the problem that marketers face by not being able to join online and offline data. We're going to come up with a couple of solutions and then activating that information once we're actually joining that data and understanding what that can tell us. And then finally, like I said before, we're going to go through some questions at the end if you've got any. So first of all, why should we tie up online and offline? So primarily it's all about the more accurate measurement of the full journey and being able to attribute the correct value to activities that you're undertaking online when there are offline interactions that we don't know about. And then, like I said, it's the second part of it is about activating the rich first-party data that you might have against your customers in your CRM, but then using that first-party data to market to those to customers and prospective customers better. So first of all, I'm going to talk through a couple of problems. So this is an example journey for a business-to-business lead generation company. A typical path might look like a display interaction. Somebody's clicked a paid search and come to the website on that. And then finally, somebody has Googled the brand and then filled in a web form on that final session. So that's where we're as marketers, not out of the box, we would just see that journey and it would end there. However, offline there are various interactions that might mean that we would like to see that happen. So there might be calls, meetings, and then sales off the back of it, and it'd be good for us to understand that activity and incorporate that into our decision making for marketing purposes. A B2C example might be a brick and click retailer with a physical store presence. So an online journey might be a similar situation to last time, but then there might be nothing at the end of it. We might think that is a waste, that is a user that didn't transact at that given point. However, they might have gone in store and then purchased the product at that point as well, and we're not able to value the activity that brought them there in the first place. What this means, to give it a bit more context, is there's a couple of examples of campaigns here, CRM solutions. As a marketer, you would value those two campaigns and the activity exactly the same. There's no difference in performance. Once we start taking into account some offline information of what happens after the lead is generated, you can see that there are distinct differences in these two campaigns and product areas, which can mean that it can have a significant impact on revenue at the end of it, which is the important number. So if we had this information, then we would definitely make different decisions based on cloud-based CRM solutions. To give a business to consumer example, we might have two campaigns. One is barely breaking even, and then the other is seemingly making some money. So we, as a marketer, you would put more money into the area that is working, and maybe pull back on the area that's not working. However, if you took into account in-store sales, you could find that the dresses campaign is actually generating significant sales, but just in an offline context. So the solution, and I must stress as well, this is a Google Analytics solution. So the main concept of this is being able to join the two key data sources. So this is joining Google Analytics with your CRM. And to do that, we need to have a unique user identifier present in both systems, so we can actually map that at a later point. So you can do this in two ways. So one is the client ID. So the client ID is Google Analytics unique user identifier. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail around each of these in a moment. So that, and what we would do is push the Google Analytics client ID into your CRM system, so we have that present in both of those data sources. The other option is using your unique user ID or customer number, customer reference, and then putting that into Google Analytics. And then again, we would have the same situation where we have a user identification number in or ID in both of these systems, so we can join that and measure later on. So I'll talk about each of these two methods in a bit more detail now. So the Google Analytics client ID is a cookie-based ID. So this is a screenshot from Developer Console, and you can see that there is a cookie being placed on this browser, and that contains an ID, which is the client ID. This is browser specific. So if you were to navigate to this same website on a different browser, this was Chrome, if you went on Microsoft Edge, it would be classed as a different client ID. And the same goes for a different device. So this is browser specific. So how do we join the client ID and with the CRM system? So here we've got a web form, a normal web form, where you would have various fields such as name, email address, phone number. And what we would do is create an additional field within the form. However, this field is not visible to the user. This is a hidden field that we would use Google Tag Manager to extract the client ID from the cookie that sits on the user's browser. We can then insert that client ID into this hidden field. And once it's in the hidden field, upon submitting the form, the client ID would be then present against that user record that user record within the CRM system. So to give this a little bit more context, here's an office furniture firm example. So to the left-hand side, you can see these are the online touch points that we would always get visibility of. This particular example is an e-commerce business. You can transact online, but so there are some transactions which occur offline over the phone at a later date. So we would like to understand what happens and value the channel activity properly based on what is happening online and offline, but at the moment we're only seeing online. So there's actions such as quotes and phone calls that are happening offline, and then ultimately sales that we have no visibility of. So in terms of a quote, we would use the method that I just explained before, using a form and the hidden field to insert a client ID into the form, which then is submitted into the CRM. So we have a record of the client ID in the CRM. The second obstacle to come over is the phone call issue. So you might be familiar with phone tracking solutions such as ResponseTap or Infinity. So if you have a tracking solution such as this, you would have a unique phone number generated per session, and the user, when the user calls that unique phone number, what we can do is also use the same method explained before to insert the client ID into ResponseTap's call record along with the phone number, the call ID. So then what needs to happen is, so the phone operative who's answered the call, at the end of that call, they would, when the customer puts the phone down, they would need to stay on the line, and ResponseTap has a call whisper with a ResponseTap ID. So the phone operative would need to input the ResponseTap ID, the call whisper, into the CRM record along with all the other details that they've taken on the phone call. So then in using that method, the ResponseTap ID would be then sat within the CRM system. So what we can do then is pull ResponseTap with the ResponseTap ID from the CRM, and we will get in return the client ID back into the CRM against that individual customer record. So that is how we will get the phone call information and the client ID back into the CRM. So again, there might be quotes and sales and other things happening later on at a later stage, which we want to know about. And we can send this information to Google Analytics using Google's measurement protocol. So that is just the method in which Google Analytics tracks information. So just to give this a little bit more a visual context. So Google Analytics will track the phone calls and the web behaviors of users. We would also track any lead submissions in the CRM from the web. But then we also have these other stages that we wouldn't normally have access to, and then we use the measurement protocol to input this information, whether it be we've got a lead or a qualified lead, a quote, or even a sale. So just a little bit more information on this one. If you have Google Analytics 360 and Salesforce, there is a native connector for these two systems in order for you to do this very thing. So what does this mean in terms of a practical example? So for the furniture business, the measurement outcome was quite significant. So there was an extra 38% of revenue that came through phone sales, and in terms of the number of sales, there was an extra 24%. But the most important number is that the average sale value over the phone was 121% more than the average order value from an e-commerce transaction online. So what we found was that the people who were ordering a larger quantity or more considered, more expensive purchases were calling up rather than just transacting online. They needed to have a more consultative sell and speak to a phone operative. So that has a significant part in what we're trying to, in how we would value certain products and categories of based on this information, because there's certain differences with the makeup of the products that is sold online to offline. So the second method I explained was the user ID. So in order to, so on the left hand side here, we've got the CRM, and we would have lots of customer information. So there's a name, email, and then your unique customer ID, which is generated by your CRM system. What we would do, how it works here is there would need to be a login action. So this requires some sort of login facility. When a user logs in, the user ID is passed from the CRM into the web browser, and then from the web browser we can use Google Tag Manager to capture the user ID and insert it into Google Analytics. So that then we have both the user ID in both of these systems. So there you have it in terms of anonymized data. We have these IDs with all these web interaction data against these IDs that are the same that exist in your CRM system that can be joined later. So here's a couple of scenarios of how this can help join things up. So user might have an online journey where they log into your website on their desktop, and they don't perform a transaction or anything. They might come back on a different device, so a mobile device, log in, and again they browse the website but do not transact. They might have a mail shot, which could be a physical mail shot, which you might track in your CRM. So they might have a leaflet, a pamphlet, sorry, delivered online to the house. But then also they might walk into store and buy a product, but then they might even walk back into the store and get a refund. So there's an awful lot of offline interactions here. But if they purchase in store and have an account, then we can match that user using their user ID that they might give, or an e-receipt in which they give their email address, which we can match with their user ID in the CRM, and then we'll be able to join all that up using the user ID, and we would see the full journey of that user. Another example is potentially a software as a service business, and initial interaction might be an offline one. Might be a cold call, but the record is created there from that operative, the sales operative, and then online that user may log in and browse to the website on a brand term, sign up for a free trial. They might come on a different device and then be served ads in other contexts, and then purchase the software on their desktop. But using the user ID, we can join all of these touch points up to understand that their initial interaction was a cold call, and the rest of the interactions as well. So the user ID is really important, and to maximize its effectiveness, as I said, it requires a login. So upon login, it'd be extremely beneficial to adopt a persisted login, such as one that Amazon or another retailer like that might use. That just means that we can track as many interactions as possible going forward for that user. And it's also important to take every opportunity to set the user. So if you are doing an email shot, and you might be able to inject the user ID into the email. So when a user opens the email, we can send a measurement protocol hit into analytics, and we can track that user has received that email and opened it, and we can see that. So then, which one to use, client ID or user ID? I would say there's distinct differences, which I'll go through now, but I would always recommend both, because then you have as much information against that user as possible. So the client ID will track all interactions prior and post login. However, it won't track cross-device. In terms of the user ID, this will track cross-device. However, it only tracks when you've logged in. So prior to a login happening, authentication, we won't have visibility of that user logging in, that user's behavior online. But using both methods, you can join on offline interactions as long as you have your user ID or your client ID assigned to those interactions that are offline. So that's all about joining the data and measuring what's actually happening in the full journey. But then really important part of this is then activating it. So here we've got an example where we've implemented user ID, we're tying that up, we have that ID in both of these systems. What we can then do is analyze and segment, and a lot of CRMs have this built in terms of audience segmentation. And we can use a feature that I'll just talk a little bit more about in detail. So we can set, for example, this example has the customer details with some segments that we might create that might be useful for our marketing efforts. So we might have customer type where we might have loyal customers or new single purchase customers. We might have the vertical, the B2B vertical defined, so it could be finance or telecommunications. There's a feature of analytics, Google Analytics, which is called data import in the admin section. So as long as we have the user ID and the user ID is present in both systems, we can create some custom dimensions related to customer type and B2B vertical that are scoped against a user. And then we can use a data import to import that information. Again, this has to be anonymized information. You're not allowed any personally identifiable information. So that is important to remember. So in terms of activating, once the information, we've enriched analytics with this user scoped information, we can create GA audiences in analytics. And then from that, we can actually activate and push these audiences to the ad platforms, but also a web optimization platform called Google Optimize or Optimize 360. And we can do various things with it once they're in these platforms. So once we've got our first party data and audiences defined, we can target, we can become more targeted with our advertising. So we can target only this specific audience. We can target users that are similar to the audience that we've created, or we can exclude audiences from our targeting. So to give this a little bit more context, we've got some examples. So here we have a display prospecting example for a SaaS business. So we've done our analysis, we've defined our customer segments as a loyal segment, but also in finance. And we know that these are very valuable, so we might want to serve a much more exclusive introductory offer to try and capture their attention because they're so valuable. We also might want to, because we know that these look like people who are in the finance vertical, we might want to serve them imagery which might resonate with the finance prospects. So we can actually do that with a similar audience. In a search context, this is again that office furniture retailer. We have a keyword called keyword office chairs, where the context could be different for different users. So there could be individual users in a B2C context just wanting an office chair for their home office, but then there could be also office managers who are looking to kit out their new office of 200 staff with office chairs, and you can imagine that the value of each of those type of person is extremely different, and we would want to target the more valuable set of users there. So we can do this using a similar to audience. So we can create the B2B audience from analytics, send it to Google Ads, and then do a similar audience to exclude people who look like the B2C customers and only target the B2B customers. Another example is we can do more advanced retargeting. So we might have software, this software as a service business. We might do the analysis and find out that there are certain behaviors that customers with a high propensity to churn exhibit. So this could be interacting with the platform less, or viewing the invoicing page, for example. So we could create a specific audience and retarget these people who look like they're going to churn imminently with advertising that might try and prevent that. So it might be showing them featuring showcasing new features in a YouTube video, or can do display ads with a specific offer to try and make them interact with the platform and stay. So the other example is website personalization using Optimize, or Optimize 360, sorry. So you can take the customer data. We created a segment for telecommunications customers, and we can create a specific audience and personalize a site around their need. So we can offer them very specific content that might be relevant to that vertical and personalize it. So there's also efforts that we can do to exclude irrelevance and save money and put the money into areas that work better. So in terms of a B2C context, we might have very loyal customers, and we can define that as an audience. We can exclude them from brand paid advertising. So we can rely on them clicking organic results and coming to us anyway without having to pay on a brand click. In terms of another example for a brick and click retailer, there might be people who return products quite frequently. They might buy a lot. We might want to target people who buy a lot, but then the returns might actually not make it worthwhile for us to pay for those users. So we can exclude users who could be defined as serial returners. So that's all the examples of activation. There's a few important things to consider in all of this that you need to think about. So browser cookie handling. So in this day and age, privacy is paramount, and there's lots of there's advancements in browser technology in terms of how they handle cookies. A lot of browsers are deleting third-party cookies after 24 hours, such as Safari now. So that would mean that using the clientID method, the cookie is deleted after 24 hours of inactivity. So it's important to consider that in when you're weighing up these different methods. I would always also, where possible, try to use the userID method where possible. Personal identifiable information as well. That's very important. You don't add it to analytics. Analytics policy is against that, and there's the whole Google GMP ecosystem is privacy compliant and privacy safe. So it's important to make a note of that. Also, finally, app and web properties. So this is Google's new version of analytics. So by default, there's a vast improvement in tracking users in this platform and defining them as a single user. So in current universal analytics, you have to create a different view in order to implement user ID. A normal standard view would be a client ID view. However, in app and web, this is unified, so you can have both in the single view. And going forward, you will be able to do a lot more with app and web. So to summarize, it's all about joining the data. That is the key element. Whether you're pushing that in offline or analyzing online, it doesn't matter. That is the key element of all this, is joining it. Then you can measure, analyze, and segment in your CRM, or push data in using measurement protocol or data input. And then once the information's back into the Google Analytics environment, you can use the audience features to activate in the paid and optimization platforms. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. I hope you found it useful. So we can open the floor to some questions if anybody has any. I'll just open this. We do have one question. Is there any way to automate the segmentation? So yes, there is. However, it does require you having the enterprise level GMP stack, so the 360 versions of analytics and the advertising platforms. The reason being is that they natively integrate with cloud products, and you can do an awful lot of clever stuff with machine learning and AI in order to segment and push that information on the fly back into analytics. I'll just open it up for, is there any more questions from the attendees? There's one more. We don't use Salesforce. Can we apply this methodology to any CRM? In short, the answer is yes. Salesforce has a native connector, as I mentioned before. However, this is possible with your CRM. You just need to implement some development work around that. There's another question saying exactly the same and mention NetSuite or HubSpot, and yes, it will be possible with those two products as well. Are there any more questions? So if there are no more questions, I hope you found that useful, and we will call it a day there. So thank you. Goodbye.